now officially on the air. Oh man, I'm almost out of coffee. I should pause and go get some more coffee, but I won't. All right, I'll tough it out. All right. When we were talking about culture, we looked at this reading on what is culture, and it gave all these different definitions. One of the things that I wanted you to think about was usually when we have these kind of broad general terms, it means that they're intended to indicate something that human beings do that connects a lot of things together. And culture is one of those. So if you can think about culture as a general term and think about it as the integration of a number of phenomena associated with human existence, I think you're getting there. In other words, one of the things we talked about that's really important with culture is language, okay? And with a subculture, we talked a little bit about a subculture. That is a culture that may be, you know, a smaller sense of identity within a broader identity, okay? And that's where we talked about maybe regional cultures that have to do that are recognizable in part by the accents of the language. Like you can hear someone who's from some part of the usually some part of the South, and they're not all, and like a Texas accent isn't the same as an Alabama accent. And after a while, you start to hear that. There are some actors, voice actors and film and television actors who make a living by being able to emulate those different regional accents. What they're doing in our terms, they're tapping into one element of a culture, okay? Because we also know that coming from, say, the deep South, not so much Texas, but Arkansas, Alabama, Oklahoma, you're coming from a different experience of America, generally speaking, than someone who comes from California or someone who comes from New York, okay? Start thinking about what makes that experience different, and you're going to be able to identify the elements of what we would call culture. Okay, that is, if you think of culture as the sum total of the different kinds of human expression that characterize an identity, in other words, human expression in terms of the language we use and the way we use it, the habits that we have, and the way they recur or don't. Not everybody eats the same kind of foods. Hey, there's a cat in the background there. It's so funny because I'll get distracted by one little image here, and it's usually movement. It's the paranoid in me. But you know what I'm saying? In other words, if you live on the coast, you're going to probably going to eat a lot more seafood than if you live inland. That is a part of a coastal culture. Food can reveal a lot. You'll hear people talk about ethnic cooking sometimes, or ethnic food. That's what they mean. It's a food that's characteristic of a culture, as distinct from other cultures that, generally speaking, don't eat that food. One of the either jokes or indictments of America as a culture is that America doesn't really have American cuisine, that there's no real American food. And some people say, no, there is. And then they usually talk about, hamburgers and fries and stuff like that. That is, they talk about fast food. Does America have a culture with respect to food?
Thanksgiving.
Well, Thanksgiving's not food, but tell me, you're close. How does that suggest a culture? What's this whole thing? Because it's coming up too. What's this whole thing of Thanksgiving? Because it is very cultural. Why do we do it? What are we telling people by having Thanksgiving? We want a day off. We want a 4-day weekend.
It's family gatherings.
Well, people everywhere have family gatherings, so that's not. In other words, it's not us. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's just a similar dinner. Most people have turkey.
Why?
Traditional. It's just traditional.
Okay, but it's traditional. Why? Because when you get into tradition, by the way, you're plugging into culture.
Okay.
Yeah, so that you're right. In other words, I'm not discouraging you. I'm saying you're right.
Well,
where does Thanksgiving come from?
Well, it comes from actually the Indians helping us survive a terrible winter. and
Well,
bringing,
who's us? Because I wasn't there.
well, pilgrims.
Well, and I certainly wasn't there, right? They would have burned me at the stake. Okay, Shelby, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I did. I was
Yeah.
going to mention it has to do with the harvest and that it was plentiful and therefore they're thanking and blessing like everything involved with that.
Yeah, one of the things that we forget, we could say the same thing about Christmas, is that Thanksgiving was taught to us really early on, probably elementary school, right? As being this time when, for reasons no one understands, Indigenous Americans decided to go and help out the filthy, disease-ridden pilgrims, okay? Because those pilgrims were starving, and in fact they were. But what it really is about, it's very much like Christmas. These, if you think about it, these observances are cyclical and they have to do with cycles of nature. And one of the things about agrarian societies is that important part of the cycle of nature when you have harvest, which is what Shelby's talking about. And so every culture does something like that at harvest time, because unless you've had a bad harvest, and then you might do something else. I mean, you might have certain kinds of rituals or observances that you do to mitigate the bad effects of a bad harvest year, or to ensure that the next harvest is better. All of those things become part of your culture. And so both of those explanations together are accurate. In other words, there is some historical veracity to the idea of the so-called Thanksgiving meal that was provided and stuff like that. Most of what we know is myth, but most indeed of what Americans know about America's past is in fact myth. It's not history. But there's also that idea of harvest and the importance of having harvest and celebrating the fact that, wow, we got through another year and the harvest was good, so we know we're going to have enough food to get through the next year. Okay. So it's those things together. The way that specific settlements of people observe or celebrate that reveals their culture. It reveals the way that they are relating to each other and to the rest of the world. Okay, so culture is that. It's the evidence of how people relate to each other and to the rest of the world outside of their cohort, their society. Okay. Christmas is the same way, you know, for all of American history prior to about really certainly the Civil War, most Americans didn't celebrate Christmas, not in the way that you think, certainly not as a commercial holiday. One of the things that really encouraged Americans to celebrate Christmas kind of in the way we do now, which is a kind of a spin-off of the way England did, was Charles Dickens touring through the United States and reading Christmas Carol. Because one of the ways that he would make money, because he had a habit of, you know, going through his money pretty quickly, is that he would tour the United States because it was a great market, because we didn't have a lot of great literature and we didn't have cool accents or anything. And so he would travel around and he would read from his writings. And one of the most popular was Christmas Carol. Okay. And so Americans started thinking, gee, that sounds like a really cool thing to do. Let's do that. So that's us connecting with actually another culture of which we are a kind of hazy extrapolation. Okay, we have a strong historical tie with Great Britain, not uniquely and not exclusively, because a lot of us, our European ancestry does not come from the British Isles, it comes from other places. Okay. In fact, most of us are more like me, where it comes from everywhere. It's just everybody's jumping fences, and there's atonal music and, you know, lots of miscellaneous drug use. And so you have these mixed people, all right? But that the way that settles at any given time is an indication of the culture. If you think about Thanksgiving, and more importantly, if you think about Christmas, increasingly in America, those are commercial holidays. You know, I mean, the day after Thanksgiving is Black Friday, right? There's no reason for doing that other than to boost sales, retail sales. There's no religious observation associated with that. There's no long-standing tradition that, you know, civilized people everywhere spend all kinds of money that they don't have on things no one wants so that they can feel better for a day. No, we've decided that that's an instrumental component of contemporary American culture. Having Christmas be a time when people spend themselves into debt every year, and if they don't, the economy could go into recession. Okay, that's what Christmas is. You know, that's the reality of it. But that's not the way most of us experience it. Most of us experience it as, well, I'm going to go and see, you know, like me, I'll go see my brother, my sister, my dad's still with us. I'll go hang out with my dad. You know, we'll make breakfast for him. I'll bring the old man over to my sister's house. You know, we'll have a nice meal. He's still breathing. That's really good. Well done, old man. You know, and here's a present because you're still breathing. And no, you don't have to give me anything because you don't have any money because you're old and you're in America and it's a lousy place to get old. And that's cool, right? I mean, there you go. It's family time. But you hear, like, you watch what happens with the stock market if we have a bad Christmas season. I mean, stock market today, the Dow Jones just fell 700 points. Why did that happen? Today, just dropped 700 points from yesterday, you know, from as a Monday. Why? Why would that happen? Keeping in mind that they're 3 hours ahead of us. What was the bad news?
Was it Pence's circle like COVID or?
Related to that, it was the idea that we set a close to a record, pretty much, arguably a record for the number of identified infections in a day. So that this rounding the corner thing is clearly not quite what's going on, whatever else is going on. And there was a 700-point drop on the stock market, which means that people are selling things off because they don't have confidence in tomorrow. Okay. Now that is a part of American culture. It really is. That same thing doesn't necessarily happen in other parts of the world, and not necessarily the same way. So a lot of America is about consumer capitalism. Almost 70% of all economic activity in the United States is us going out and buying stuff. That's important because when that stops, all of a sudden the economy starts to shake, you know, and that can be a problem. So that can tell us something about America as a place. Well, you know, would you say, for example, that America was a materialistic society largely, or would you say that America is a spiritual society?
Surely material.
I don't think it's totally anything. No culture is totally anything, right? I mean, in technical terms, right? But there is a strong strain of materialism in the United States. And yet, here's the interesting thing. We tend to be highly superstitious, and we tend to be much more likely to believe in guidance by unseen forces and things like that. That is, things that are not material. There's a significant cohort of Americans who could be classified as anti-science, which is fundamental materialism, right? So you see, American culture is a bit of an enigma in terms of what we actually are. So the challenge for us is to figure out what is a culture insofar as it defines a nation. And remember we talked last time about state, okay? And so, Zachary, can you mute your microphone, please? And in this article on cultural nationalism that you see, it's the fourth link for the module. There's a discussion there about culture and nationalism, okay? And what they're trying to do is give us a way of thinking about the one as distinct from the other, culture as distinct from nation. One way to think about it is this: a nation can be the body of people unified by a shared culture. Okay, so when you say the nation, you're talking about the people within a culture. The culture can be what defines a nation. Does that make sense, first of all? Can't tell. Okay, so in other words, the culture can include the language, the habits, the customs, as Patricia pointed out, the traditions, things like that. The way that we observe different phenomena in different ways. All of those habits and institutions and practices and expressions are the things that define a nation, that is a settled population who share those things to some extent. Okay, so I would argue that it's not that difficult to connect those things. The culture is the stuff. The nation is what the stuff identifies. The stuff identifies us as being English as opposed to British, or British as opposed to Australian, or, you know, Anglo-Saxon as opposed to anything else, you know, most of the rest of the world. Okay. But some people, when they talk about cultural nationalism, talk about it a little differently. Okay. And this is not clear from the article, but I like this article for the questions it raises more than the questions it answers. And that's the idea that even within a nation, you can have kind of subnational cultures. So it's another way of getting at that notion of culture. One element of culture that's mentioned here is, they mentioned, we talked about this before, the idea of high culture. Now, what did we decide that high culture was? Because most of us aren't exposed to very much high culture. What's high culture? I'm going to have some coffee. This is going to be an incredibly boring recording. High culture, as distinct from low culture.
Is it like the different culture of different classes? So like the culture of the more aristocratic or elite?
Well, it can be. Yeah, some people would associate high culture with an elite. And the idea there is, I mean, it doesn't mean that commoners or, you know, the great unwashed can't and shouldn't be exposed to high culture. But normally it's associated with two great elite institutions. They're both public, but they're both elite. One of them is universities, the other one is the museum, right? So the archive of high culture for a lot of people is the museum. But also within museums, we see an archaeological record of what we might call low culture. So high culture is both a product of elite priorities. That is, the elite, the well-educated, the sophisticated, you know, the cosmopolitan will say, there's graffiti on walls and then there's great art, and the distinction matters. The museum is where you can go to see great art. The university is where you can go to find out how to understand that great art. So, Ricky, right, I mean, that would be a kind of elite view of the world. This isn't for everybody, because first you have to be taught how to appreciate it, right? Is that what you meant? Yeah, no, I think you're right. Okay. But then what's low culture? In the United States, what would low culture be?
Is it uneducated?
Well, what do you mean by uneducated? Because, you know, remember that we're required by law, with very few exceptions, to get an education until we reach at least 16.
Correct.
So we all have to have education. You're all educated. You all had to learn how to speak, and you had to learn how to read and write, and, you know, those kinds of things. So, but there may be something in what you say. When you say uneducated, help her out. Low culture. Give me an example. If you can't define it, just give me an example. Low culture.
Is it like things that everybody can be exposed to? So like popular music or something that
Yeah.
you don't have to be advanced. You know,
Yeah, it's not very sophisticated. It's not very hard to understand. It's not made to be hard to understand. It's made, in fact, when you think about popular culture as a commercial product, it can't be hard to understand or it won't be popular. Okay. And so the idea of low culture originally would be it's culture that we make. not that's made for us by the genius of elites and all that kind of stuff. It's just the stuff that we do. So, you know, when you go to a party and some pothead picks up a guitar and starts twanging away, you know, yeah, it's tedious. It's low culture. It's just, you know, it's a folk expression, man, you know, you got to like deal with it. But it's not sophisticated. It's not hard to do. It takes no mastery. It takes no expertise. It takes no deep insight into ideas to just bang away at a guitar or whatever instrument, you know, or just sing. If you're singing like when if I don't think it's done much anymore, but at least my generation may be the last one that actually was taught what were called nursery rhymes. Okay, and that is little rhymes that kids memorize that are doing what? Teaching them the language. Using what? Mnemonic devices. What's the most obvious mnemonic device? Rhyming. The reason why things rhyme is to make it easier for pre-literate people to remember them. Okay, that is low culture. So when you wonder like, well, what's the origin of singing things and why do things rhyme? Why did that happen? Because rhymes help us remember things. Okay. And that's important because it's a way to take people who aren't literate, who before education was widely available, right? When people couldn't read and couldn't write, they could remember because they'd remember, what's that next word? Well, I don't know, but it sounds like that word. Oh, that's right, now I know. That's what a mnemonic device is. It's something that triggers your memory, helps you remember. And rhyming is one of the most basic and essential of those. And it works really remarkably well. Okay, so that would be an example of low culture. And again, the idea in its purest sense is not that one is morally better than the other. Although I think what Ricky implies is accurate. The elite will say that high culture is morally better. Okay, now I don't know, Ricky, if that's what you meant to say, but that is implicit in what you were saying, that there's a moral judgment made about which culture is actually better or better for you, right? I think what I pointed out last time is that high culture can be thought of as aspirational. Look up and see what could be. Look at things in their ideal form. You know, it's this really brilliantly constructed work of art, whatever it is. Low culture is just a reflection of things as they are. You're just describing what you see. You know, you're just recounting your experiences, you know. So you think of things like country music, original country music, not the real sophisticated stuff now, but original sort of twanging country music, you know, truck driver music, like we all heard when we were kids in my generation. I mean, if you were a working class kid, somebody's dad was a truck driver. So Hank Williams was always on the radio, that kind of stuff. Or it might be blues, whatever it was. In other words, these are not sophisticated forms of music. And they're very elemental. They tend to be considered to be very pure and very direct experiences of real life. You know, life accurately lived. Whereas high culture tends to be, by comparison, perhaps, life as it ought to be, or as it would be in a perfect world. So does that distinction make sense to you? Because the reason I mention it is because really every settled society develops these multiple cultures, okay? Now, when you look at this article, when they talk about high culture, they're sort of talking about, you know, public television and stuff like that. And like what we're doing would be an experience of high culture. You know, we're not just driving around in the car and looking at things and saying, oh, look, those people come from another place and don't they talk in an interesting way? We're trying to look at things systematically and build models of the world and do very sophisticated things that require a more advanced conceptual education. So that's moving us in that direction toward high culture, that the university properly understood is not a vocational training center, right? It's an aspirational environment where people achieve whatever their highest potential might be. It's a shame that seems to me at least to have been either forgotten or neglected by a lot of contemporary universities. In part though, you can suggest that's a reflection of American culture. If it ain't bankable, it ain't important, you know? I mean, that is America, right? To some extent. I mean, we don't put a lot of value on things that don't generate wealth. If you can't monetize it, you know, it's not going to happen. Whether it's music or graphics arts, or, you know, there might be all kinds of great ideas out there for great movies that would really be challenging and experimental and fascinating and brilliantly done. But if you can't show that they're going to put eyeballs on screens, no one's going to put the money up. And that's why there is that little niche of culture that's called independent film, where you can't say movie, you have to say film, you know, things like that. The idea is this isn't for everybody. Okay, this is for people who really want to reach, who really want to who want to aspire to understand more. And so you get like what used to be called art film and stuff like that. So that's an attempt to take a medium of relatively low culture, just the movies everybody goes to get scared or laugh or have a drama, and gee, I wish I was decorative and had attractive people around me, right? You take that and you give it a kind of inspirational escape velocity from the mundane expressions of low culture, and you try to elevate it to high art, okay? That's a tension within the United States, right? That could be part of what's called cultural nationalism, properly understood. That is, the characteristic national culture of the United States is one of tensions. There is a tension between the inertia of low culture and, more importantly, of commercial culture, manufactured culture, what we talked about last week briefly as the culture industry, between that and the aspirational culture of high art. And you'll hear it from time to time, a lot of times from some of the really worst sources, like, you know, pop musicians will sometimes get really upset because they're trying to make a deep and profound statement or say something important, but, you know, their product doesn't sell. And so they'll be very disparaging of the audience or of the critics, or they'll complain, rather than thinking, well, yeah, because I'm trying to make high art when my audience is looking for low culture. Okay. I mean, that is a constant tension of a society, a commercial society like the United States. It's also one of the things that identifies us. How do we reconcile the imperative of profit? Because somebody's got to pay for this stuff. How do we reconcile that with the minority of creative people who are genuinely visionary and aspirational, but for whom there seems to be no outlet, you know? And that can help you identify. For example, most European cultures have a much wider area of inclusion for what we might think of as high culture. The United States does not, and it never had. It never had. Okay. Now, should we be concerned about that? Does it mean that we're a bunch of hicks and unsophisticated morons who don't know how to tie our creative shoes? What does it mean? Draw a conclusion from that. Because this is your society. You're living in it. You're the ones who are going to reproduce it again and again and again and again, with or without change. Because this is happening in the rest of the world. And not everyone who looks at the United States thinks, yeah, that's the way I want to live. I want to live in a vacuous, moronic environment with very little aspirational creativity, to put it crudely. Do you feel like you live in a, you know, in a moronic environment of very little creativity? Or do you think, oh, that's not true because we have all these brilliant artists in the United States and they're very famous? Come on, help me out. I'm working hard today and I'm not getting any feedback. I feel like I'm trying to lean into a wall and there's nothing there. Come on, you know my method. I try to give you things to push against by way of.
I think we have high culture, but low culture is just more dominant, and it's so much more exposed to everyone that's what everyone kind of draws themselves to.
What's our high culture, Carson?
I mean, I feel like we have a lot of like intellectuals in our country. I don't know. I feel like we draw like a lot of like medical high culture people and like that kind of community.
Well, medical ain't high culture. Medical is material.
Yeah, but like what they represent and the culture that they're a part of.
They don't, though.
Okay.
I mean, in other words, the high culture is not about, technological advance. It's not a technological issue. It's an aesthetic issue. It's about ideas and the properties of things beyond the material world. It's as much spiritual as it is, in fact, more so than it is material. Yes, you're right in that you're manipulating material things in order to produce art, but you don't get that from a medical doctor. Okay, so, Carson said, well, we have a lot of intellectuals in this country. What's an intellectual? What's an intellectual? Are any of you intellectuals? You know what's amazing? You all are sitting there wired that alleges to be smart, right? A smart device of some sort. You could like one up the old man and say, well, old man, I don't need to know anything. I'll just Google the damn thing and I'll tell you what an intellectual is, my friend. And yet no one's doing that. I wonder why. What's an intellectual? Carson, it's a fair point. Are there lots of intellectuals in the United States? How would you know an intellectual when you ran into one?
Well, for me, I would describe an intellectual as just someone who has probably not just a basic 4-year education, but has gone on to like a PhD, master's, that type of thing.
But what makes them an intellectual as opposed to just an overeducated bore?
It's a fair point, and that's both.
In other words, are any of you an intellectual, first of all? So
I feel like
Carson
some of us
suggests,
can be in some ways.
well,
Yeah, we can be intellectuals. When I said that, I more so meant that America like draws people from the top of their fields. So they might not.
Does America really draw the top intellectuals?
No.
No.
There were 2 emphatic no's. Make that 3. We have a blossoming consensus of no on intellectual. Well, we know that we draw many of the top technical people in the world. We certainly, and I think that's what Carson means. But being an intellectual is not a technological achievement. It's not. It can help, but that's not what we mean. In other words, an engineer is not someone we think of necessarily as an intellectual. Has anybody looked up the word intellectual?
I looked it up.
Okay, what did you come up with, Shelby? I don't mean to put you on the
Okay,
spot.
so I found 2 different types of definitions. One is a person possessing a highly developed intellect, or I found something that I like a lot more, which is a person who engages in critical thinking, research, and reflection about the reality of society and proposes solutions for the normative problems of society, thus gains the authority as a public intellectual.
I would say
But
that an
that's specific.
intellectual is someone who
So-
understands what you just said, right? That's the easy way of thinking about it. Right. First of all, an intellectual is someone possessed of a first-rate mind. You can't be a second-rate thinker and be an intellectual, because an important component of this is curiosity. By definition, an intellectual is almost pathologically curious. An important component of curiosity is skepticism, right? And it doesn't mean, it's not the same thing as being a conspiracy theorist or something like that. That's not skepticism, that's paranoid lunacy. And that's a different thing. And that ain't an intellectual, okay? But the idea is someone whose orientation to the world is characterized by skepticism and curiosity, not skepticism and fatalism. I'm skeptical about all these things. I'll just trust in fill in the blank. That's a fatalist. That's not an intellectual. But an intellectual is someone who has a first-rate mind that's hungry. That mind is hungry all the time. What is it hungry for? Understanding about the fundamental predicates of human existence. What is the nature of this world and the things that inhabit it? And most particularly, of course, the human dilemma. Okay, that's an intellectual. Now, intellectuals can express that in a variety of different ways. Many of them, for example, would be philosophers, but they might also be great musicians or painters or playwrights or novelists or something. But not every playwright or musician or novelist, in fact, most of them in the United States, are not intellectual. A, they may not have a first-rate mind, but may be clever, and that's fine. B, they really may not be that curious. They really may not be that passionately curious about understanding the world. What they've done is they figured out a way to make what we generally and not disparagingly refer to as low culture, because that's what people want. But see, that's an intellectual is not looking for what people want. You can think of an intellectual as looking for what people are rather than what they want. Does that make sense? Because Shelby gave us really two related and very powerful definitions, that the second of which is really complex. But I would suggest so is the first one. How do we know a first-rate mind? It's not education. Education cannot make a second-rate mind into a first-rate mind. That's not what it's for. I'm not sure anything can do.
I think what makes it the difference is a first-rate mind is might have started off as someone who might be well-studied and might know a few things, but they've started to go, okay, I've read all the theory, I've read all these questions. I want to make my own questions off of what I know and make my own theory.
Again, it would relate, though, Zachary, back to that idea of, it's not so much I want to make my own stuff. It's like, okay, I've gone as far as Immanuel Kant can take me. I've gone as far as Karl Marx can take me. I've gone as far as fill in the blank can take me, whatever philosopher, right? But I'm still curious. Okay, so I got to work harder. And the idea of an intellectual is this is someone who never stops working. Never.
Never stops.
Till they die. That's the end of
That's what I was talking about.
Yeah. So again, I'm trying
That's
to
what I
amplify on what you're saying rather than
Oh, yeah.
predict it. Yeah. Yeah. And it is because of what Shelby was explaining to us about this idea of these really fundamental issues, problems, concerns that characterize existence. I want to know what that is, you know, and I'm hungry to understand that. And I understand that in order to do that, I have to find very sophisticated ways to apply this machine, which means I got to work on making this machine as good as it can get. I have to discipline my thinking. Okay. Now, again, an intellectual is not necessarily a genius. Okay. You're going to meet very few people who are legitimately possessed of
That's
genius.
a common misunderstanding.
Yes,
I
it
do
is.
agree.
Yes, it is very common. Now, again, I mean, you can be smart. Smart's cool. It really is. It would be fun to be a genius, but I've known at least two people who are genuinely possessed of genius. And both of them were absolutely inspirational to be in the same room with. It's so nice not to feel like you have to be anything like the smartest person in the room and you can just sit there and soak it up. But both of the people I know, maybe a third possibly, right, were always, it was like they were always hungry and never satisfied. And there were always, there was another outlet that, you know, for their genius, and usually creative, but creative mathematically, creative artistically, you know, creative musically, whatever it was. That is more than merely an intellectual, but an intellectual can be someone who's just got a good, solid, first-rate mind, you know. And when I say a first-rate mind, what I mean by that is that mind that is nimble enough to act upon that characterization of skepticism and curiosity. I don't mean a genius. It's just that, you know, you're a good, lively thinker, and you can respond to those drives to want to know more. Okay, I would suggest that the United States has not always been the most inspiring place for people who think like that to live, because it's often very difficult to monetize those things. And it's probably in many ways more difficult than it might be in other places in the world. And it's generally not respected. I would suggest, for example, that most of America holds most public educators in relatively low esteem because we don't really value that. We do, because again, it's like, I mean, I remember when I first decided to do this and people saying like, well, first of all, you know, you're never going to make any money. Like that mattered. It wasn't like I was going to starve though, right? In my palatial bachelor pad, but it was that idea of, oh, well, you could make so much. I kept saying you could make so much more money in the private sector. You could make so much more money in fill in the blank, right? And that's not a uniquely American thing, but it is a strong component of American culture. The expectation that the primary motive for everything is material reward. People still believe that. And yet, when you look at the people who have been the significant innovators, including in America, their primary motivation was not money. They couldn't help but do that. See, the thing about a mobilized genius, when you possess genius and you run with it, is you're not thinking about money. I've never known an extremely brilliant person who was preoccupied with money. Never, not once. Because there always are things that are more important. This gets us back to what Shelby was helping us understand about an intellectual. You didn't hear in that definition for money anywhere, because that's not what motivates an intellectual. And, I think we forget that because as a culture, we simply don't value that. We don't think it's very important. You'll know that because we listen to like hack politicians who say, well, there's book smart and then there's common sense, and I've got common sense. What they're really saying is, I don't understand a damn thing I'm doing, but it doesn't matter. The intellectual is going to come along and say, you know what? Yeah, it does. That's why this isn't working, because the people trying to do this don't understand what they're doing. You know what? Because I've spent 40 years looking at it. You spent 14 minutes. It's not about making stuff up. I think that we have a critical shortage, arguably, and that's almost an opinion, so I have to be careful about how I say that. It's a point worth debating. Does the United States have a critical shortage of that kind of galvanic intellect that can just say, no, let's bust through this. Let's look at this differently, as opposed to, well, I better conform with prevailing standards. I can tell you, for example, as someone who had to slog through the American university system, that the more I advanced, like from BA to MA to PhD, the more resistance I found to thinking outside the box. Exactly the opposite of what most people think. And I had to cook up a dissertation that would satisfy a committee. It wasn't what I wanted to do. It wasn't what I wanted to write about. It had nothing to do with things that I thought were important, but it was something that I could crank out. It was good, solid research. It wasn't plagiarized or crap or anything, but it wasn't important. And I knew it wasn't important because I was essentially told, Hughes, if you want to get out of here, you got to check this box. Okay. That's not about being an intellectual. It's not. So that's why I say it's not necessarily about people who have PhDs. There are a lot of really brilliant intellectuals who never finished university. So we have to keep that in mind. Now, the question with respect to culture is, where do you put the intellectual? Forget the genius, because ain't no place for a genius to fit. Where do you put the intellectual in a culture like ours, like the American culture? What do you do with them? Because in other cultures, right, you have people who venerate people who are philosophical or people who are deep thinkers or whatever. We don't really do that, though, do we?
We really, kind of like you said earlier, almost don't welcome a lot of true intellectuals in the U.S. for the sole reason of, oh, that's not going to make you a lot of money. And in this society, how much money you make almost determines your quote unquote worth. So when someone spends their entire life on, I want to ask the big questions, I don't care about money, I want to help people and solve these philosophical issues, a lot of America just goes, I might read your book later.
Except that we know that most Americans don't read more than one book to completion in the average year.
Exactly.
Including, by the way, university students. We don't read. We just don't read.
We really don't.
And again, until we find a better medium of exchange, right, for the transmission of culture, reading is still an important archive. And if you don't have access to that archive, and a lot of university students don't, it's not just I can sound out words. It's can you look at a complex argument on the page and make sense of it? And we're finding that fewer and fewer Americans can do that. And it's a little bit troublesome, but it is part of our culture. It doesn't, what I'm trying to get you to think about with all this, because I'm looking at a few blank stares here, is these are the things that tell us who we are. But more importantly, they tell us who we are because they tell us what we value. Okay? So think about culture as all of those behaviors that reveal what we value as opposed to what we do not. And one of the most important ways to make distinctions between people is what they value. Because if you find two peoples who have to inhabit the same geographical space, right? If they share a lot of value, they're probably not going to have a lot of trouble inhabiting the same space. But if they don't, especially if there are critical values that one side has, the other doesn't, you're going to find conflict, and it's going to be pretty serious. And this is often the source of war. There's still a common assumption that, for example, that religion causes war, that religion is the source of Middle East terrorism. It's not. There's no evidence that it is. You know how we know? Because the vast majority of the millions of Muslims in the United States are not terrorists and are not violent. Okay? So the question is then, why did those people who became freedom fighters or terrorists or insurgents or whatever, why did they fight? Why did they kill? Okay? They may say we do this because of our religion. What we know from studying this, again, think intellectual. I need to understand this process better. What we know from doing that is usually it has to do with people who feel like an alien value system is being imposed upon them. It's much more than religion. It can be materialism. It can be a sense of decadence. It can be a lot of different things. I mean, under the Taliban in Afghanistan, remember the people we're dealing with right now to try and achieve some sort of stability in Afghanistan, because there probably will never be peace. You could be beaten for wearing Levi's, or for a woman wearing makeup. You could be beaten for that. Okay? That's more than religion. That's got nothing to do necessarily with God. It has a lot to do with the terms of order, how society is going to arrange power. That's really a social and political question. That's not a spiritual question. Again, people may claim, well, it's in our religion. That can be a misunderstanding of religion. Think of it rather as, this is our view of the world. This is our culture, and you don't fit in it. Get out, or we will kill you. That's different from, well, you know, my religious beliefs tell me that I should tolerate this, but not that. That's a little bit different. It's a little bit different. They're related. There's no question they're related. I'm suggesting they're related because they're part of culture. Because out of culture and what we value, we decide who's going to be in power and what the nature of that power is going to be. That's the main thing I want you to think about. The phrase that I often use is the terms of order. Under what terms will order be maintained? I've just found that that's been the most useful way for me to think about it, to have that kind of bookmark in my head. Yeah, this is the terms of order. Under the terms of order historically of the United States, there is very little question that part of the terms of order for over 200 years have been white supremacy. It's hard to argue that, but it's not the exclusive terms of order, okay? Because we've had gradually, because of internal resistance from countervailing culture, right? Countervailing values, countervailing beliefs, countervailing convictions, we've had to yield, to a somewhat new terms of order, which is, okay, well, there has to be more inclusion here. After 1920, it's like, okay, women can now vote. That wasn't part of the terms of order before. Because the cultural expectation is, A, women wouldn't want to vote. Why would they? In their empty little heads, right? That was the cliche, right? But also that they shouldn't vote because they don't have rational minds. People as recently as 1920, there was a critical mass of men and many women who still believed that women were just congenitally trivial thinkers who could not grasp the complexities of the terms of order such that they should be involved in it. I mean, look at American history, look at global history. It's been recent that women have been invited meaningfully into the real terms of order, where you look at the United States now and you see a woman as Speaker of the House. Okay, we've still never had a woman as president. There have only been a few women as prime ministers anywhere in the world. So this is a global phenomenon, part of the terms of order globally. What is going to be the power structure with respect to men and women? And even indeed, increasingly, if you start to think of sexuality not as binary, men and women, but as a kind of spectrum of orientations and predispositions and existences and identities, you see how the terms of order is challenged even more? This is important because what's being challenged is culture. The expectations that you have based on all of the things that you do and have learned that tell you who's in charge, who leads, who follows. All those things can be challenged. So when you're thinking about culture, it has this component of power to it. Not just political power in the sense of elections and holding office and all that, but it has power in your businesses and who's the chairman of the board and who makes the decisions. And, you know, we're seeing a lot of this. You think about like the Me Too movement and things like that. Think how recent that is. I mean, those abuses have been with us for centuries, okay? Because they're so deeply embedded in the cultural terms of order. This is the way we've always done things. Early on, Patricia invoked tradition as a part of culture. That's right. It's the gravitational pull of culture, tradition. Why do we do that? Because it's the way we always have. That can be the hardest thing to overcome when you're trying to transform a culture, is trying to push against that idea. Well, wait a minute, man, this is all we know. Why? Because it's the way we've always done things. Okay?
Mr. Hughes, you made me think of the Women's Right Bill has never been ratified. And it came close.
Right. Oh, you mean the Equal Rights Amendment?
Yeah, it's never been ratified because I think
it doesn't have the force of law. That's why. I mean, it was never ratified. It was never ratified in part because a lot of working class women rejected it. Their concern was if you absolutely impose at the federal level complete equality between men and women, you know, the fear was if you do that, then you're under no obligation to give a woman maternity leave because you wouldn't give, at that time, remember, we're talking about the 70s, you wouldn't give that to a man. So there were real concerns that maybe that was the wrong way to go about it. It wasn't just like some, you know, cultural cabal of white men who shut that down. There were a lot of white men who supported the ERA. But when you began to see how it would take shape, it was like, well, wait a minute, is this the best way to reflect the current ongoing transformations of American culture? And as they challenge the terms of order, is that the best way to do it? It's a much more complex phenomenon than I think a lot of people realize. And some people still believe that it could still be ratified. Technically, that's a legal question that would have to be settled in court because usually you have a certain time limit beyond which it's no longer considered for amendment. But right, the obstacle there, whatever way you put it, Patricia's right, was the inertia of culture. This is not the way we've done things. Every time we've amended the Constitution, though, we've had to take on that idea of, well, was this what the people who drafted this document intended? Well, who cares? They're not here anymore. We live in a completely different world than we lived in 1787 to 89. Those people are gone. And so are a lot of their ideas. And a lot of those ideas were bad ideas. It's sort of like saying of the Bible, A, it is the literal word of God. B, never mind the contradictions, God will sort it out. It doesn't make any sense. Because if we stuck to the Constitution as intended by the framers, we'd have a completely different social order today. And about half of you wouldn't be here right now, would not be in this conversation. Because there was no expectation that women were ever going to go to universities. There wasn't a lot of feminism then. And what there was took on kind of different contours. That came later. That was really more a 19th century phenomenon. Okay. But the idea of the strict interpretation of things, the inertia of cultural meaning is a very traditional notion, a very conservative notion, that some things are absolutes that never change. It's the difference, for example, culturally, and this becomes important too for us today. It's the difference between someone who's considered a conservative and someone who's considered a progressive. A liberal being essentially right in the middle. Okay. A conservative is much more likely to say, no, either let's stop where we are and hang on to what we have left of what we once were, or even better yet, let's put it in reverse and go back to when things were better, where we were closer to what we were really supposed to be. That's very conservative. That's very conservative to reactionary. Every change is bad. Every change in the terms of order in particular is bad. The progressive is thinking we can always be better than we were. We can always be better than we are. But we can't do that if we are held captive of this inertial drag of cultural tradition. We have to be able to transform that. And that is a fundamental tension within the United States right now. And not only within the United States, but all over the world. To what degree are we still going to be bound by those deep cultural traditions? To what degree is it time to slough those off and move on? Those are not easy questions. On the barricades of that argument is the intellectual. Let me think about it. I'll get back to you. Let me think about everything I know. Let me learn some more. I'll keep getting back to you. Okay. Can you make money at it? No, not really. Do a lot of people value it? No. But if you don't have that, you don't have an important element of resolving that tension, of reconciling those contradictions, because it's got to be people who think in part for the sheer joy of thinking about discovery. Okay. Not just thinking to kill time, but thinking with the motive being discovery. Okay. If you don't have that, then you can have an intellectually stagnant culture. We've seen cultures die out in part because they prevent that. They don't allow for that kind of energy to put shocks through the system that will change things. So when you're looking at this concept of sort of cultural nationalism, part of what I want you to think about is where's the tension between culture and nation? Again, the culture is what reveals the nation to us. Oh, I see how those people live. But what we also know is that within a given nation as we see it, there can be currents of tension, of subcultural tension, okay? And those things have to be reconciled. It's complex, okay? Questions?
Could part of the major difference between cultural nationalism, culture, and nation and whatnot be that culture applies to the people and the people will keep it going, whereas a nation might have to change around things more frequently for the economy, for different relations with different countries, for their military?
Well, yeah, in the modern sense, when we think of nation in the modern sense, we're taking culture and tying it to the state. Remember when we talked about nation states? That is, if you have culture infused in or embodied in the state, you have the nation state. So what Zachary's really talking about is the nation state, the nation linked to the authoritative structures of governance, okay? At that level, yes, the transformative institutions are different. You might have an elected legislature. You might have a two-house legislature. You might have a unicameral legislature. You might have or not have an independent judicial branch. You might have an executive. You might have what Britain has, where the executive is inside the legislature. It is not chosen by the people, but is chosen by either the coalition or the majority party inside of parliament. However you do that, whatever the structure of the state is, okay, the nation is linked to that for its own survival, because you have to govern that territory and the people within it, right? And so Zachary's right. Culture can exist absent the state. It's still there. And indeed, it can be, one of the things the article points out, it can contest with the state. You know, intellectuals don't always get along with the state. Artists don't always get along with the state. That's why historically a lot of them have been punished, because a lot of art critiques those terms of order and says, look, you know, the nation is fused to the state in an unhealthy way. The state is warping the nation because it's ignoring or crushing culture or warping it to the ends of those who control the state. And that's when you have some sort of tyranny, leading up to, of course, things like fascism. The idea there is that fascism attempts sometimes, mistakenly often, to kind of redefine the nation. That is, by either warping or co-opting the culture or crushing it, destroying it. You saw this, for example, culturally under the Nazis with the persecution and ultimately the extermination of Jews. See, the Jews were a sort of a multiple threat to that emerging dissident movement that became Nazism. That there was a concern about who was going to control the economy and what that meant. There was a different religion. There was, if you think about Yiddish, there was a different language that was Germanic and yet not German. But there was clearly a different and enclosed identity. There was always among Jews in the diaspora a sense of otherness that goes all the way back to the 12 tribes of Judea. Okay, there was always among Jews that sense of exclusivity, always in history, always. Okay, for Germans, that then could be reframed as predatory outsiders, right? So you take sort of ancient elements of Germanic culture, paganism, spiritualism, superstition, violence as a cult, things like that, right? And you warp the culture so that it actually isn't modern Germany anymore. Because the attempt is, no, we're going back 1,000 years to what's really German. Never mind that it's nonsense in many ways. If it works, it works. Well, one thing you had to do then, you couldn't bring Jews with you. It was common in Germany, for example, to make a distinction between people who, even among citizens, where all were citizens, between Germans and Jews. Even if you were a Jew and you were a German citizen, you were a Jew, okay? Now, part of that distinction is nation, it's culture, and it's been there for a long time. But if you can weaponize that as a tool of oppression, then you can use culture as a weapon. In fact, there's a line from a play that was written by a pro-Nazi playwright. That's one of the most enigmatic notions of culture. The guy's name was Hans Jost. And Jost had a character, I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact, because it's translated and I don't speak German. But he said something to the effect of, when I hear the word culture, I reach for my gun.
Ooh.
Okay? That's where culture can be dangerous. Both in the sense of elite high culture that can lead you away from who you truly are, but also the distinctions between people in terms of what they value and who they are. That can be read a lot of different ways, you know. And so this notion of culture is not this light, happy, cherry thing all the time. And we talk about high culture, we talk about low culture, but we also talk about where there could be a multiplicity of cultures creating tension within a single nation. And that is where we get to the thing I'd like you to look at for Wednesday, which is multiculturalism. Does it make sense where I'm going with this? Sometimes I can't tell because you've been peculiarly quiet today.
I have a difficult question on this subject, actually.
Okay.
Are you familiar with the quote 14 defining characteristics of fascism?
Yeah. Where are you going?
What's your thoughts on the idea and the theory that that America meets most, if not all, of these characteristics?
I think it's nonsense.
Really?
I'm sorry, Zachary. I think it's ahistorical. I think you're asking me for my opinion. I'm giving you my informed opinion. I just think it is. I think it's nonsense. But I think it's a useful. I think it's a very useful discussion to have. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying I don't want to talk about it. I'm saying I know the argument. I find most of it to be absolute dross. It's ahistorical. Look, the United States has a lot of problems right now. There's no question. I get that. But I mean, I could be really crude about the way I do this, and I don't want to. It's hard for me to be respectful of my own leaders when I often see them as beneath me, to be honest with you. And what I mean by that is, I don't think that people leading me should be less well informed than I am, and should be less capable of making rational decisions than I am, because I don't consider myself to be a leader at all. I would never want to be, I never aspired to that. I don't mind having a leadership stratum. I don't mind that. But I expect the people in a republic who exercise leadership to be responsive to those they're leading, okay? Now, there is clearly a problem with that right now. It's a malfunction, all right? It could be changed if about 10 people stopped breathing, who are the leadership of both major parties. It has been, make no mistake about it, the leadership in both political parties that have tried to divide us in irreconcilable ways. It hasn't been us naturally doing that. It isn't that we don't, again, we have those tensions of multiculturalism in the United States. The dirty little secret is we always have. We didn't always weaponize them. And that's what we're doing now. That's not the same as fascism, though. So it's an interesting discussion, I think, for another time. But no, I think there's a lot of garbage being written about fascism right now. I'm going to be teaching a political philosophy class in spring. And essentially, the working title of it is The Philosophy of Violence. And what I'm going to be looking at is different regimes, different philosophies and philosophers who somehow advocated violence in some way, and who used hate and used things like that in order to try to govern. And the fatal flaw of all of that is that it doesn't last. It just doesn't work. It breaks everything it touches, okay? There hasn't been a fascist regime since Portugal, really, and Spain, but Spain and Portugal both were circa 1975. There hasn't been an authentically fascist regime that has really exercised meaningful power unless there was a complicit ally like the United States. But the fact that we've backed fascists doesn't make us fascist. It's more.
Well, I'm not saying that it's because we back fascist regimes that makes us fascist.
We are fascist.
Yes, it's because we meet almost all of the common traits of a fascist regime. We just parade ourselves as a democracy.
That's like, I don't know how many of you believe in astrology, but the thing about astrology is that it is so generically constructed that, I've seen people do this where they'll say, oh, you're a Pisces, so that means this and this and this. But yeah, somewhere in that mess, because human beings are into pattern recognition, I could plug myself into that and say, gee, you got me figured out. Until I realized, no, that's nonsense, because none of what you're saying really means anything. Those definitions of what constitutes, or what the constituent parts of fascism are, apply to almost many of them, any industrial democracy, any industrial republic of any kind, any industrial settlement of any kind is going to have a lot of those components. And it depends. One of the fundamental components of fascism is the militarization of culture. American culture has not been militarized. It really hasn't. I've been in militarized cultures. I'm sorry, man. I've been in military dictatorships. We are nothing like that. We don't have a situation where the average American, all right, can be shot by a soldier and nothing happen. We don't live there.
I mean,
now, do we have problems with our police force that are deadly serious? Of course we do. That doesn't make us fascists, okay? That's not fascism, because there's no unifying idea behind it. Fascism has
Didn't we just have some National Guards a few months ago kidnapping civilians, putting them in unmarked vans and taking them to unmarked locations?
No. A, they weren't National Guard. B, we did know who they were, even though they weren't wearing ID. C, that has not become normalized in the United States. If all those things became accepted and normalized, we would be living under fascism. But the very fact that there's been as much resistance as there, you will not have 100 days of demonstrations in a major metropolitan area in a fascist country. They will be killed, all of them, not one or two of them, all of them. By the way, I would remind you that every one of those people who was rounded up, so far as we know, was released within an hour. Okay, that's not what fascists do. We don't have a secret police. We don't have death squads. We don't have any of that stuff. So again, Zachary, I'm not saying everything's good in the United States. Please don't misunderstand me, all right? But what I'm saying is, before you decide that we're living under fascism, go to a fascist country, you know, live in a military dictatorship. Try talking the way you're talking now under fascism and see how long you last. Under fascism, I would be in prison 15 years ago at least. You know why? Because I studied terrorism. That would be enough to lock me up. That would be enough to lock me up. And I make ridiculous comments about whoever the leadership happens to be all the time. There are any number of things I said just today offhand that would get me locked up in a fascist country. And locked up means tortured. It's an extended vacation, okay? So no, I just don't buy it. I mean, but you're asking me, and I want to air the subject out, but I think, you know, I don't want to get too far afield from where we're supposed to be here. Now, I'd like you, please, because apparently a lot of you didn't have the time to do that over the weekend. That's cool. Please read The Cultural Nationalism. It's very, very brief. Then take a look at the link on multiculturalism and try to think of examples other than the United States, but certainly we can use the United States as an example too. What I tried to do today, however imperfectly, is to suggest to you the circumstances under which multiculturalism, A, can exist, B, can become problematic, can create tensions that can be difficult to reconcile within a single society. So that's what I'd like you to start thinking about. So are there any questions about that? Because now that we're, now that we're all living under the red banner, we all have to get out the black flag and get nasty, according to Zachary. It's a great question, Zachary. Please don't misunderstand me. It's just that when you've seen how bad human beings can be and you've come back from that, then you start to think, wow, yeah, I know where we could be going. We're not there yet. It doesn't mean, though, that the discussion should not be had. So please don't any of you misunderstand me by thinking I'm trivializing that argument. I hope the very emphatic nature of my response would suggest that I'm taking it very seriously, and I'm not being disparaging at all. I hope that's understood. Okay. Part of it is too that my experience when we start talking about the United States and fascism and things like that is that students become profoundly depressed and fall into a kind of despair. And I do feel kind of responsible for that. I have to be careful about that. Especially think about how we started today's class. I am concerned that you're doing well. And I'm very serious too. For those of you who feel like this is becoming a struggle for you, we're all available here. If you want to talk to me, you think that will do you any good, or you want to find out who else you might talk to, things like that, I'm very serious. I mean, sometimes a lot of us have been around long enough that we've been through some bad things and we've come out the other end of them. I wouldn't deny you that consideration if you felt it was appropriate. Having said that, I think you all should be appropriately protective of your privacy and your personal lives. I think that's a very, very important thing going forward. And I hope that makes sense. I do. Okay. All right. So again, if you have questions about your grade on the last assignment, you'd like to discuss it, shoot me an email, let me know when you're available. We'll set up a time. Happy to do it. Any other concerns on your mind, again, where you think that just a little one-on-one discussion, maybe you're not real comfortable talking in class, it's not your thing, that's fine. If you want to meet with me individually, I'm always happy to do that. And I emphasize the word happy. I like my job. I like what I do. You might not think it's very important, but I have a hell of a lot of fun doing it because I think it's important. And I'm glad that I put the time in to be able to do it. And I hope that you all get into something that you like as much as I like this. I'm very serious about that as well, especially when you can do it from the privacy of your own home. All right. So anything else before I let you loose and you can get back to the much more pleasant real world?
Oh, just so you know, before you sign off, just so you know, I described you to my friends as an intellectual.
I won't hold it against you. I don't know that I share that conviction, but I won't hold it against you.
Intellectual.
Yeah. Anything else? All right, then have a good day, and I will see you, hopefully all of you, on Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.